Welcome to Sarder TV. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Our studio guest is Harvard business professor Thales Teixeira, who's here to demystify consumer disruption in the workplace and what companies can do to defend themselves, which he details in his latest book, Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. Thanks so much for joining us, Thales.
My pleasure.
So before we delve into your book, let's talk a little bit about you and your career journey up to this point.
So I'm originally from Brazil. I came to the United States in 2004 to do a PhD in marketing at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So I spent 5 years there, and my thesis was on how to understand and improve the attention in TV commercials. And at the time I was using this what was novel technology, which was called eye trackers. Basically, you could track people's eye movements while they're watching the TV. And I developed what it would eventually become this area of research that I call the economics of attention that I work with and maintain at Harvard Business School. But in 2009, they liked my research. Harvard Business School hired me, and I've been almost 10 years as a faculty with the Harvard Business School in the marketing unit. My early part of the work was on economics of attention the first 5 years, and then later on I started trying to understand startups, digital disruption, what was going on, and I tried to help large companies understand and respond to digital disruption.
So interesting you say back in 2004. How much has our attention span changed in that time, especially with iPhones coming out in 2008? Have you tracked that since? Have you done another study?
Yeah, so I've been doing trying to understand actually from the 80s basically to collect data. And physiologically our attention doesn't change. What is interesting is not just from a consumer standpoint, because when you think of attention, I like to think it as a product, just like as as water or tomato or anything that you would buy. And so companies need to buy this attention, and the way they buy it is from media companies. So media companies capture attention and they sell it to advertisers. But the amount of attention increases over time very, very little, only when new people are born. But the demand for attention, these companies, there's more companies, and these companies have more product launches and more brands. And so the demand for attention for these companies outstrips the supply, and that causes the price of attention to go up.
Okay, so let's get into your book. Unlocking the Customer Value Chain took you actually 8 years to write and research. What motivated you to write this type of book, and can you explain what the term in your title actually means, customer value chain?
Sure. So the motivation was in 2010-11, I visited my first startup. It was the first time that I went to a company and saw, a bunch of young kids rolling around in scooters, electric bikes, and all these things inside the building.
You said, I want to work here.
Oh yeah, my host actually said, Professor Teixeira, you can ask questions, because I was completely silent as I was walking down the corridors. I saw the founder, this Mark Zuckerberg guy, working there in jeans and T-shirt, and my response was, I have no questions because I'm just taking it in.
Right.
So the purpose was to really understand how they were planning to disrupt the media industry, and then I talked to executives. They said, Professor Teixeira, this is the way we do it. And since then, I visited Netflix, Airbnb. I talked to executives at Uber, Amazon, and a host of other smaller tech startups at the time. And everybody would say, we do it very differently. Our plan to disrupt our market is this, 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 this. But the more I heard it, the more I realized they were all doing the same thing. Actually, there was a pattern to it that is being applied very specifically by industry. So that was the idea. And the second part of the question that, what is the customer value chain? So in understanding this pattern of disruption, I started trying to understand what these entrepreneurs were thinking about. And, the translation is the entrepreneurs look at what are customers doing with established companies. So for example, in the beauty industry, one established retailer is Sephora. And so if you understand what customers are doing at Sephora, customers go to Sephora to sample beauty products. They need to test in their skin because it's very specific, and then they evaluate what options they want, what products, they choose one. with the help of Sephora consultants. They buy it from Sephora and then they replenish. They go back every now and again to replenish your product. So all these are activities in the customer value chain, what customers need to do in order to fulfill their needs and wants with products. And so these startups were looking at this and saying, I could do one thing much better than the established company. Birchbox many years ago came and said, we can do sampling of beauty products better. I don't want to go to a store as a consumer. So they said, well, we're going to put all these samples of beauty products in a box, ship it to you, you pay $10 a month, and you get samples of beauty products so you can do the trial part at your house. That was what they were trying to do, and they said you can do all these other activities, buying, replenishing, so on and so forth with Sephora or with Amazon or something, right? So that was kind of the customer value.
Oh, so interesting. A lot of them don't reinvent the wheel. They just see an opportunity already within a successful company and kind of piggyback onto that to make it better or easier for the consumer?
That's right. So they, instead of doing everything, right, Uber could have come out and saying, we are going to provide better transportation than taxi companies. We're going to buy the cars, we're going to maintain the cars, we're going to have dispatch services, we're going to hire people to drive these cars, all these things. Uber is like, no, we're just going to do one thing better. We're going to do a better matchmaking. Because you need a taxi, there's lots of taxi cabs in the corner, you're somewhere else, and you find it hard to find. So they did the matchmaking and they don't provide the service. So they offer one activity better, right? Airbnb, the same thing. They could build hotels just like Hilton and Sheraton or the Four Seasons, but they're like, no, we're just going to use other people's properties and we're just going to do the matchmaking better.
So during the course of your 8 years of writing your book, how much has changed for these companies that you talk about? And as far as from a customer concept to completion, did a lot change as well?
To rephrase one aspect of it, it was 8 years of research, but I wrote the book in basically 13 months.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Once
Interesting.
I realized that it was important to write this book, it took me 13 months because I had
So you had all the research.
I had all the research. And the research was not trying to write a book. It was 8 years of trying to understand what was going on, right? And in the process of understanding, I realized that sort of I need to just describe what I learned. And maybe some people will find it valuable and useful and will use it to build companies or to respond to these digital startups. So from the 13 months, I'd say not much has changed, right? Conceptually, the same thing. The only thing that has been changing is the industries that are being disrupted in the same pattern that I've described in the book, what I call decoupling, are now growing, and now you can find examples in all these industries. And when I started out, I found it in retailing, then in media, then in education, transportation, and now.
So no one's immune.
No,
It's
yeah.
just,
Now
I
I can see it basically in any industry. I can now identify an example.
So you also state in your book that it's customers, not technology or companies that drive disruption. Explain what you mean by this.
Initially, when I started doing the research, I had the same view as media and many other executives that I would visit large companies, right? Nike, BMW, Siemens, Bayer, and I would ask the top executives, okay, so what's your big problem? They're like, oh, digital disruption. Okay, so what is causing disruption in your business? And they would invariably point into one of two answers. They would say either technology X, Y, Z is disrupting our business, or they would say, you know, tech company, Uber or Google or Facebook or Netflix is disrupting our business. So they would say either a company or technology. But the more I started working and trying to understand the same issue from the side of the disruptors, they would basically say, well, we don't start off with new technologies, right? So Uber, the way Uber started off, it had an app, but when you press the button and you requested a car, there would be a person at Uber that would start calling up black car companies and say, hey, are you available? Can you go to this person? Mm-hmm. There was no automation. Today it's automatic. There's no person involved. But in the beginning, it wasn't. In the beginning, Airbnb was just a website. Amazon, the same thing. It had no new technologies. So it couldn't possibly technology that is the starter of disruption. It was actually, you know, you and me, when we arrive at the airport and saying, let's go to the cab stand, we're saying, let me try to order an Uber. Or instead of saying, with our families on vacation, I'm going to stay in a hotel, saying, well, how about we stay in somebody else's house? So these little decisions that we make frequently and collectively across millions of people, that is what is disrupting the ecosystem and the industries in many markets. And so my point is that it is consumers' decision to change their needs and wants or behavior that is driving disruption. The consequence of that is that startups quickly respond to those much faster than large companies. So while you think it might be startup, Netflix is disrupting the market. No, it's consumers, and Netflix is just fast to do that. And obviously some tech companies, as they grow, startups, they grow, they start investing in technologies to facilitate the fact that consumers wanted to change, right? So quite a few years ago, consumers have always gone from store to store to compare prices. And then, well, now the prices are online because some companies have e-commerce websites. Well, now I can go home and look at my laptop computer and compare prices after I go to a Best Buy store. Well, today what do? We pull out our phones in the store and we look at the prices cheaper and we buy it, you know, what's called showrooming. So all these things are facilitated by technology, but it's consumers that are causing the disruption.
So do you think your role as a Harvard Business School professor gave you earlier insights into how traditional business models were being completely disrupted, say, by this digital landscape? Working with young people all the time, were you?
So yes, so you know, my students, they're users of these things.
Right.
So the first cases that came across to me were from my students. They would tell me about these obscure startups that were doing something completely different. And then I would start checking on it, following up. And you know, the beauty of working at Harvard is that you can go to a startup and say, tell me about your secret sauce. And they're like, gladly, I will. You go talk to the senior executives in large companies, like, tell me what is the problem? What causes you to wake up at night and sweat? And they're like, gladly I will. So it was, you know, you're a reporter, so you have this access. People will just tell you things that normally, you know, if you're like a competitor, they wouldn't. So in a sense, being at Harvard gave me that ability. That's point number one. Point number two is, I saw a study done by IBM that showed that senior executives in large established companies spend between 80 and 95% of their time focused on their industry, focused on products, on partners, and problems within their industry, right? Very, very little time outside of their industry thinking about it. And once you get that customers are disrupting markets, customers don't have the silos. They say
the blinders on.
They don't. They say, I'm going to shop at Amazon, I'm going to use Airbnb, I'm going to use Uber, I'm going to use Birchbox, and I'm going to use all these other apps. And it goes in a domino effect. And so because I was not focused on an industry, I looked across industries, and that's when you see the pattern. It wasn't like any brilliance of mine. It was just I could look at many different data points, whereas any executive is looking only in their industry and thinking, oh, this is very specific to our industry. It's not. It cuts across industries.
What advice can you offer to traditional companies versus a startup in regard to maintaining their customer loyalty in order to help them avoid this particular path of disruption?
So, you know, once I started thinking about this concept of the customer value chain, all these activities that consumers go through in order to buy their products and services, I realized kind of something just magical shot in my head. And it was so simple, but my students helped me identify it, which is this concept that if you look at what consumers are engaging in, right? If I go to a retailer to buy a flat screen TV, I have to first look at all the available options. And then I compare on features and prices, and then I eliminate some. That's what I'm doing. And so I have a select few, and from those I choose one brand, and then I have the salesperson come and I pay for it, and I get it delivered in my home, I get it installed, I use it, and then I dispose of the TV somehow. When you look at this customer value chain for any product or service, you can map onto them. Any activity can be classified into one of three activities. Is it a value-creating activity? So for example, comparing TV options and looking and testing creates value for me as a consumer, as well as using it, of course. Or is it a value charging activity? Do I have to pay for it somehow, right? In this case, the only value charging activity is buying the TV. And then the third set of activities are what I call value eroding activities, are those activities that don't benefit me in any way or the company that I'm dealing with. And if I could just snap the finger and do away with it, I would gladly. For example, visiting the store. There's no benefit for me just doing that activity. Disposing of TV. It's just necessary that I have to do that, but there's no benefit to me. So there's a series of value eroding activities, value charging activities, and value creating activities. And that happens no matter what industry you are. Whether you are selling cement, water, clothing, airplanes or turbines or cars or services, all your customers engage in value creating, value charging, and value eroding activities. And so once I realized that, the power of that is that it explains many aspects of your business. How do you improve your relationship with your customers? Do you want to acquire more customers? Create more value, reduce value capturing activities, or eliminate value eroding activities? Do you want to retain customers? Same thing. Do you want to get loyal customers? Do you want to compete with others? Do you want to disrupt businesses? Do one of these three things.
Give us an example of an established company that actually took that advice.
So basically, Best Buy is a good case. So Best Buy, going back to that issue, Best Buy was suffering because Amazon, in the beginning, Amazon created these apps a few years ago to facilitate showrooming, right? They wanted to sell online and wanted to sell because it didn't have stores that offered TVs or electronics at the time. It wanted to incentivize you to go to the store and then pull out their app, take a picture, or scan the barcode, and then get the price of Amazon, maybe buy online after you went to the store. And so that was increasing. Today, by some measures, 70% of people practice showrooming regularly in stores. Right? So that was a big problem for Best Buy because it had all these costs of stores and salespeople, and people were just like pulling out their phone and just buying on Amazon or buying elsewhere. So showrooming was a problem. And what Best Buy decided to do is very clever. So first it said, well, people are buying elsewhere because the prices are cheaper. So let's match the price. So the CEO, Hubert Joly, decided to match the prices online. But there's a problem there, right? If you're a retailer, how can you compete with an online company at the same prices, given that you have such higher costs, your stores and your salespeople? So the CEO, Hubert Joly, needed to figure out a way to say, okay, consumers are showrooming. They're not going to stop anytime soon. We can't bar them from doing that. And we need to have the same prices as online. The CEO decided that the only way out is to figure out who else was benefiting from this showrooming. In other words, to say in an academic speak is, who were they creating value for in addition to the shopper? And the answer is they were creating value for the suppliers, the manufacturers, the Samsungs and Sonys of the world. Whether you go to Best Buy and you buy the TV from Best Buy or Amazon, Samsung and Sony are benefiting, right, if the TV is sold online. So what did he decide to do is he decided to charge those manufacturers for placing those TVs in the shelf.
So was that a bold move back then?
Yeah, because it was the first time ever, right?
Yeah.
This happens, by the way, regularly in grocery stores. So makers of food and produce have to pay to put the items in the shelf. It's called slotting fees. But for Best Buy, it was the first time an electronics retailer decided to charge manufacturers for the privilege of putting those TVs in the shelf. And so in that sense, Best Buy reduced value charging activities on the consumer side, and it realized that it was creating value for its other customers, the suppliers, and decided to charge those.
Hence, they're still in business.
And they're doing very well, actually.
Yeah.
Best Buy is doing very well. And one important takeaway from that is, and this is very few established companies do, established companies that think that technology or startups are the disruptors, they even buy the technology or buy the startup or do a price war. That doesn't go anywhere. When you understand that consumers are disrupting markets, you need to understand, are you going to do something in favor of the consumer or against? In the case of Best Buy said, the consumer is not going to stop showrooming, so let's let them do it. And they even created TV ads, say, come showroom in our stores for the holiday season. And they realize also that Amazon is not going away anytime soon. So this solution was a solution that did go against the consumer, didn't go against their digital disruptor. It went in favor. And today Best Buy is partners with Amazon and even collaborates on many aspects.
Your book uses the term decoupling to describe how industries have been disrupted. Explain what you mean by this term, and can you share a case study highlighting this pattern of disruption?
Absolutely. So what is decoupling? Basically, decoupling is the decision of a startup to look at the customer value chain, all the activities that the established player provides. In the case of beauty industry, Sephora provides all those activities. In the case of electronics retailer, Best Buy provides a series of activities, and a digital disruptor decides to look at one and say, we're going to do one thing much better. So Birchbox decided to say, we're not going to substitute all those activities, we're going to do sampling much more convenient for the consumer. And they took on sampling as their key beachhead into the market, and they stole customers' activities. By the way, in decoupling, you don't steal the customer. Sephora still has those customers that go to buy it, but Birchbox now has the trial portion of consumers. So now they're kind of technically sharing the consumer, right? Amazon didn't completely steal customers from Best Buy because people still go to Best Buy to test the electronics. Amazon just steals the portion which is selling the actual TV, but you still go a lot on.
Do they like
offline.
using that term steal in a business sense? Is there another way that they can say the way they're competing, or steal is a term that's used as far as in this disruption?
Well, you know, the traditional lingo is steal. I prefer to say sharing because before it was stealing. So how does business work in general? You steal customers, right? Pepsi creates a product, steal customers from Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola creates another product, steals a little bit of market share. You know, IBM does the same thing with its other competitors. So BMW, Mercedes, Audi, they steal customers from each other as they launch new products. This new wave of digital disruption is different because it's not technically stealing, because you're stealing only a few activities and allowing the others to provide, right? So technically speaking, we would say Uber, it doesn't steal customers from automakers, right? Automakers still make the cars and sell the cars, but now because, for example, in my household, we decided to downgrade from 2 cars to 1, and we use Uber. But there is also, like, you know, there's a Ford out there that was purchased by a driver that's still being used. It's just that it's not used all the time, right? So decoupling is this, looking at one activity and taking that from the established business. So Uber stole the activity of matchmaking drivers and riders. Airbnb stole the activity of matchmaking owners of real estate and people who want to rent them. Birchbox stole just the activity of sampling. Amazon steals many the activities of selling the product, while people still go to stores and compare and evaluate and things like that. A great example is Trove. Trove is an app-based insurance company. Basically, once you sign up for Trove, you link it to your Amazon account or your other online purchases, and then it knows all your possessions. And then you can turn on or off insurance on demand whenever you please on a daily basis, just by swiping right, swiping left, and suddenly you're being insured. So you're going abroad and you're going to a place that you feel that might steal your jewelry or your watch. So you can just turn on insurance when you board the plane, and then you travel and you come back, you pay on a daily basis. When you come back, you turn.
So it's just a day-to-day thing, the way it's structured?
Yeah, just like an Uber for insurance, right? You turn it on, turn it off, but Trove decouples. It doesn't do all these activities. It doesn't contracts with the insurance companies to hold the liability. It just sells this on-demand insurance to consumers, but it doesn't do the underwriting and all of those complicated, extensive and complex and expensive activities that traditional insurance companies do.
So what are the different stages of value for customers, and can you share some examples of how this played out across various industries?
Of course, yes. You know, going back to the question, the original issue that that all you can ever do for the benefit of customers are create more value, reduce value charging activities, or eliminate value eroding activities. So the first stage of value. So how can you create more value for consumers, right? One startup at the time that was quite interesting in the video game space was Twitch. And Twitch is a website that you go online, you choose a list of video games, and you choose one, and you essentially go into a chat room in which some person somewhere around the world is playing that game. So you see the image of their screen, you see the image of their face because they have a webcam, and they generally have a mic, and they're talking about it as they play. So you don't play the video game. You just watch somebody else play the video game, and you can ask questions or comment with other people that are watching. And by the way, 80 million people around the world are paying to watch somebody else play a video game.
Do you?
No, I don't do that. But I find it fascinating that they build a beautiful business. And why? What is in it? Well, what they realized is, we all know that playing a video game is a value-creating activity. What they realize is watching somebody else play a game can also be a value-creating activity. So they decouple those activities such that you can pay and not play, just watch games. And why do you watch it? You want to be educated, you want to be entertained, you want to learn how to play better, you want to see if the game is worth buying, all these things. That little insight caused this company to skyrocket, and in 3 years, Amazon bought it for $970 million. Right?
Amazing.
So that is an example of decoupling in value-creating activities. Right? Decoupling in value-eroding activities is another video company called Steam, essentially the Netflix of video game. Why? Because you don't have to go to the store to buy the game and bring it home. You can just stream the video game from your console, and just like Netflix, Netflix decoupled by, in that period of time when we used to go to Blockbuster to get the DVDs, Netflix said, you don't need to go to the store, we'll ship the DVDs to you, eliminating a value-eroding activities. And then the last one is eliminating value-charging activities. So when I grew up, if you wanted to play a game, you have to buy it first and then play it. The big challenge was, which one should I buy? And if you buy something you didn't like, you're stuck with it for months because it's expensive, right? Now today, most video games that come out are free to play. You can just play it infinitely for a long time without paying a dime. If you want to improve in the game and differentiate yourself and benefit, you buy little tips and trinkets to help you improve, and then you pay afterwards. So that is eliminating a value charging activity for many consumers. And by the way, I don't know if you heard of Fortnite. It's made $2.8 billion by not charging at all.
Where are they getting their income stream from?
Where are they getting their income stream? It's become such a craze that a few percentage of people will pay to have better playing capabilities than all the other games. In this case, they pay for costumes because essentially it's a public game, public platform in which many of the gamers are playing online, so you can pay for the costumes there. And that's
where they make their money?
That's where they make their money. Most people pay nothing.
Why do you think so many traditional companies have been caught off guard by this digital transformation?
The pattern that I observe while talking to senior executives in large established companies is, once you become big, you only want to play games, be in markets in which you have an advantage. That's the reason you're big. So if you're a bank and you have 800 branches, you only want to create products or be in markets in which those 800 branches are an advantage, right? If you say, oh, I'm going to sell a product online, well, what am I going to do with my 800 branches? So you initially like, no, I'm not going to do that, right? Retailers, the same thing. They put products in their stores. When a Blockbuster was in trouble because Netflix was entering, what Blockbuster decided to do is, let's sell more products in the store, right? Obviously, people stop going to the store. It doesn't matter what you're selling. So the point is, and telecom companies, the same thing. They just want to add more channels to their set-top boxes. So what I realize is this mindset of established large companies is, how can we leverage our assets to make more money? How can we leverage our set-top boxes, our TV antennas, our cable boxes, our stores, our retail footprint, our salespeople? And they're only thinking and leveraging their mindset. The way I explain that is they're resource-centric. They're centric on the resources they have, and they will only play games in which their resources will confer them an advantage. The problem is these startups are much more customer-centric because they don't have any of these resources. So they're looking at what can we do on behalf of the customer. That's the only way we can get these customers, do something better for them. And they don't think about leveraging any of their footprint, their assets, their resources, because they don't have any. And so almost by definition, startups are more customer-centric, and they create products that are better for customers, and that's how large established companies lose them. And so large established companies starts to lose them, and what do they look at the startups and saying, they're using these technologies, or it's the startup, or it's this tech company that is disrupting us, so let's fight back at them. And so they completely miss the point that is consumers who are driving this change.
In your book, you stress the importance of having an innovative business model. How has the digital landscape affected this idea, and can you share an example of an organization that was leveraging this concept?
Basically, what's a business model? I've seen a lot of definitions and I couldn't even wrap my head around them. Some of them are so complex. I had to create my own that was like simple enough for me. Business model is understanding how do you create value and for whom, and then how do you charge for the value that you create and from whom, right? So in the case of Best Buy, it innovated in a business model by saying, before we create value but for showing people, letting people test and try electronics, and that's the value we create, and letting them buy it. How do we capture value? By selling the TV with a markup, putting a margin on top, selling. What they realized basically is that that was incompatible with showrooming, so they decided to capture value from suppliers and manufacturers, and so they adapted their business model. So what we've been seeing in retailing is technology is not the big driver that is making successful businesses in retailing. It is fundamentally a change of the business model. Costco is very effective, and Costco has a different business model. Instead of making all their money from margins on goods sold by buying products, putting in a margin and selling to consumers, they decided to charge consumers a subscription fee, $90 per year. And when you look at the income statement of Costco, guess what percentage of their net income comes from these subscriptions? What do you think? What percentage do you think?
80?
More.
So it has to be 95.
More?
Oh, so it's over the top. Okay.
It's over. It's more than it's 109%.
So that's their revenue stream. That's what they get.
Yeah. So their business of selling products actually loses money, and they more than compensate for that by charging.
They can raise it even more, and people would still pay.
That's right. And so it's a very innovative
I stopped
business
when it was
model.
70.
Oh,
when
yeah.
I had my Costco thing, I said, it keeps going up, it keeps going up.
Really? Well, there's still a lot of people that pay for it, and they subsidize this other portion of the business, which is putting markups and margins on products. Mm-hmm. Essentially, they're going lower, below cost, and being part of actually a club in which you have access to these things. So this is a business model innovation. You know, where's the technology in that, you could be asking me? You know, the technology only is enabling this to become bigger at scale, but it's not the fundamental driver, right? And so the various of these industries. Now, I'd like to say that there are a few technologies that are highly disruptive and change the game in a few markets, but these come every 10 or so years. All of these new, you know, evolving features of products and technology is not what is fundamentally changing the game. The problem is the media focuses on that, and we all love to hear about new technologies, and we think that is what is causing the major shifts in markets. But in reality, it is consumers, and then adapting to consumers by what you asked in your question, how to innovate on this business model. Understand what it is, understanding where you're creating value, and where are you not fully capturing the value that you're creating. Back to Best Buy. It wasn't fully capturing the value. It actually wasn't capturing any value from manufacturers and suppliers. And it realized we're creating value for these guys and they're not paying us one dime. Let's start charging them. So this, in one of the chapters of my book, I talk about this idea of leakage of value. Leakage of value essentially when you as a business create some type of value for somebody, but you don't charge them either enough or you don't charge them at all in the case of Best Buy. And the first thing that you should do, as an analogy, you know, your kitchen sink is leaking. What do? What's the first thing that you do?
Call the plumber.
Call the plumber to fix it. Do you say, I'm going to buy a new faucet, I'm going to buy a new kitchen? You never do that. You first fix that leak. Business executives, they're not calling the plumber. When they see a problem in their business and disruption, they say, let's buy new technology, let's create new products to sell in new markets. Well, the leak will not disappear. So first, call the plumber, fix the leak before you go into new markets, create new products, try to find new revenue streams. And Best Buy is a classic case of they call the plumber and they fix the leakage problem.
So what three factors have really contributed to business model innovation?
The innovation of the business model first is basically this idea that you need to understand where you're creating value, right? Deeply understand it. And the way that I go about it when I put on my consulting hat and work with companies is mapping out all the activities in the customer value chain and figuring out where are you creating most value and for whom. That's the beginning of everything. You can't do anything without that, right? So that's one of the aspect of that. The second is really understanding that startups are questioning the traditional business models in many industries and they're experimenting around it. So experimentation is a big way that startups are changing the nature of the game, and consumers are actually, without knowing, we are choosing amongst different business models. When I decide to go for a cab or buy a car or use an Uber, I'm choosing between various different business models. So understanding that's important. And then the last and probably the most important one is becoming more customer-centric. If customers are disrupting markets, if customers are making the choices, then you need to focus much more of your attention on the customers and value for them. And that is the beginning of trying to understand where your business model has failed, what has changed. Because if you think that it's changed for the wrong reasons, you're going to correct it in the wrong manner. So you need to find the underlying logic of what's going on. And I hope that my book gives enough examples and provides the method and the frameworks to deliberately go and do all of these things.
Now, how do you think companies can anticipate their customers' changing behavior?
Very good question. So, you know, this idea of being more customer-centric, when I started looking at it, I would ask executives, are you very customer-centric? All except one said, we are very customer-centric. Only one said, we are not. But most of them say we are very customer-centric companies. We do this, we do that on behalf of our customer, all these things. In reality, when you look at how businesses behave and make decisions, they're not customer-centric, they're firm-centric. They're making decisions on what's better for them. It's natural to be that way. And if anything, they're obsessed about their competitors. And then they say, but they pay lip service to our customers, of course. So customer centricity is very important, becoming more important. The reason startups are disrupting markets, the way that you get them back is to kind of like up your game in customer centricity, something that you tend to lose over time. As you become big, you focus on your resources, your own financials, you focus on hitting the numbers for Wall Street. And how do you get to become more customer centric? Is first, basically, you need to realize that companies are not customer-centric. People are. Only people, your employees, your executives that make decisions can start prioritizing their customers in a decision versus prioritizing their own jobs or their own company's financial well-being. The challenge is for individuals to become more customer-centric. From all the theories of psychology, we know that. Why would you do that over time when you change your behavior? You need to have two conditions. First, you need to be motivated to do so. So employees need to have this intrinsic motivation to be more customer-centric, and so companies need to figure out how to do that, right? Create incentives for them personally, for the company, but be able to kind of like have them see the customers. The problem that you can't have affection or empathy for somebody that you don't see it on a regular basis. So the way to motivate is you got to get employees close to the customer. And if you're a manufacturer that sells a product to a distributor, that sells a product to the retail, that sells a product to consumer, you have no clue what's going on. right? I've heard from the CEO of a watch company says, I have no clue why my consumers, the end consumers, buy my product. I think I do, but I don't really know why they choose mine versus another on any given day, right? So one point is getting close to consumers. You got to just get close. You got to sell to consumers. You can't sell indirectly through others, because then you'll never know why, and you don't get that. The other aspect of, apart from this motivation, is the capability of doing so. So creating all of these processes that kind of help you get close to the consumers, help you understand their needs and wants, help you see the impact of your decisions on the end consumer. So part of the reason why many companies that historically would never sell directly to consumers are doing so. Nike's now selling shoes directly to consumers. It's alienating all of its distribution network, but it realizes if we really want to understand why certain consumers are buying all of these other new shoe brands and moving away from us, we need to get close and understand it. So those are the two elements, I'd say.
So what are the 5 key steps that companies must address in order to be successful at decoupling?
So, once I was doing my research and I looked in all of these different industries how decoupling was happening, after a while you see a pattern emerge. And the pattern was so crisp and clear to me that I ventured in saying there's a recipe for decoupling. Now mind you, do recipes guarantee success? If I give you a recipe for a cake, does it guarantee the cake will taste well?
Absolutely not.
No. So recipes don't guarantee success. What recipes are a combination of the ingredients that you need and the logical steps that you should follow. So that's the recipe for the decoupling. The first step in the recipe is mapping out the customer value chain, right? Mapping out all the activities that your customers or the customers of your competitors, the established companies, engage in order to procure and acquire and use products and services. Not just the activities, not just what we call the purchase funnel or the consumer decision journey, because that stops when you buy a product. Well, what happens when you use it, you reuse it, replenish, dispose of it? You need to go all the way until the end, until they dispose of the products. So that's the first step. After that, a second step is, in all these activities, you need to classify them into one of those 3 categorizations that I explained briefly. Is it a value creating activity, is it a value charging activity, or is it a value eroding activity? Why? Because the way you will decouple is different. What value you're giving to consumers are different. And then third, you need to understand where is the weak link between these activities. Established companies provide to consumers all of them, but there's one point in this chain that consumers are not fully satisfied. I wasn't fully satisfied having to go to the store to Blockbuster to rent a DVD. I wasn't fully satisfied of going to Sephora not knowing what I wanted to buy, right? I wasn't fully satisfied getting a cab for a variety of reasons. And so figuring out where are these points of rupture, and that's how decoupling will work, because you want to steal an activity for yourself and you want to break the link between these activities and take one for your business to offer to consumers. And how do you, the fourth step, how do you take this activity? Basically, what consumers are looking for is lower costs. The thing is, the insight is that it's not just monetary costs. It's not just the price that they need to pay. Consumers pay for what they buy with their time, their effort, and money. So these are the 3 currencies that we have. So we should think of everything that we're buying everywhere. If we're buying a vacation package or buying a house or buying education, we're paying for the supplier with our time, our money, and our effort. And if you can reduce one or all of these 3, you will steal customers from large established competitors. And so the way that you steal that activity is by what I call the 4th step in decoupling is you reduce the monetary, the time, or the effort costs. And if you do that by the powers that be, you eventually steal that customer activity away, because customers are looking for lower costs in that regard. And then the 5th and final step is you're going to steal an activity. Guess what? The established company is going to notice and not be happy about it, so they'll respond to it.
Retaliation time.
They'll retaliate. How? What are they going to do to retaliate? I don't actually know. But after looking at many retaliations in different industries, I realized there's only 2 avenues. It's sort of predictable. Exactly how it's going to happen, we don't know. But there's virtually two avenues of retaliation. If somebody breaks your pen and gives it back to you and you need to write on the piece of paper, what do?
Get another pen.
So you can get another pen, and that's one, or you can learn to live with the fact that the pen is broken. Actually, you can actually try to glue the pen back together, but these are the three, right? So that's what companies respond. When decoupling is a breaking of a business model. So if a startup breaks your business model, the first inclination of established companies is to glue it back together by basically saying, oh, no, you don't. We don't allow you to do that. They actually go to the consumer saying, you can't. You can't showroom. You can't go to buy the software and use it for these other purposes, right? You can't buy a DVD recorder and just watch the shows and not watch a DVR recorder and just watch the shows and not watch the ads. They try to glue back the activities by what I call recoupling. So recoupling is an avenue of response. And the other one is, in which the one I advocate most, is going in favor of what consumers want. Just break it up apart. Instead of others breaking it, you leave it and learn to coexist with the fact that your business model is broken. Learn to write with a pen that is already broken, and then figure out, adapt your business model.
It sounds so simple the way you put it.
It's all simple.
But all the companies are struggling, right? They're still struggling.
They are. And most of them are struggling because of that original idea. The root cause of the problem, they have not identified it.
What advice would you give to budding entrepreneurs who want to start a disruptive business and perhaps take on an older established company and trying to steal away some of their customer base?
Well, first, really understand the recipes of decoupling, right? This 5-step process. It has worked very well in many industries, and now the people who developed these, the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, they didn't know. There was no recipe for them to follow. They were just going at it and figuring it out as they went. But now we can see a pattern, and one that works across industries. And so understand the pattern, apply it to your own industry, and make sure that you're highly focused and better at doing one sliver of the customer value chain than the established companies. Choose one thing to do much better instead of replicating everything. Just choose one aspect that customers value that you can do much better. And much better means at a lower cost to the consumer in terms of lower monetary, lower effort, or lower time costs. If you do that, you will steal customers from big and small companies alike. That's the point.
Okay, so here you are, a budding entrepreneur who's ready to launch. What can you learn from a company like an Airbnb or Uber in how they cultivated their customer base early on?
Both Airbnb and Uber are, going into IPO mode for 2019. And there's an infinite amount of articles written on these and others like Pinterest and Slack and Lyft. And you can just read thousands of articles of what they're doing today. The challenge is if you're creating a startup and you're looking at what they're doing today, they're already big and fast moving. So it's kind of like you're a baby trying to learn how to crawl, and you look at Usain Bolt as he goes, in the Olympics faster than any other runner, and you're saying, I'm going to emulate Usain Bolt. By the way, I'm just trying to get my first steps. That's not going to work, right? At best, you should look at Usain Bolt when he was a baby trying to crawl and try to learn, okay, how does he do it? So that's what I decided to do. I decided to look at these companies in their early days. How did they acquire their first 1,000 customers? And it turns out that much of the things that they do now is different from what they did early on. In the beginning, number one, you can't acquire one customer at a time. It's going to take too long, and you're going to run out of cash before that. So they acquired customers in bulk. What I mean by that is they figured out where can they get many customers at a time. Airbnb went to Craigslist and stole many customers at a time. Uber went to, when it's end of sports events. Instead of trying to get one rider at a time, end of sports events, everybody runs out, everybody's trying to get cabs, lots of people without it, and they try to acquire many customers at the same time, right? Etsy went to fairs and acquired many customers at the same time. So figure out where you can go and you can tap into these other networks or pockets of demand in bulk and then acquire those customers, and then suddenly you grow very fast. That's one of the things. The other thing that they did is, while we'd like to think that they're tech companies, that they use the internet very well. Today, that's right, but in the beginning, most of their customer acquisition was offline. As I said, Etsy went into the actual fairs to try to get customers. Airbnb, they did lots of events in the streets of Paris, in the streets to try to convince people.
So those methods would not work today.
So those methods are the ones that you should do if you are a startup today. You should not go online to acquire customers.
So go back to the original way that these
That's right.
companies started.
So they only think about, startups only think about, I'm only going to use online customer acquisition strategies, Google and Facebook and Instagram, because they're scalable. I can just crank up the money and grow. The problem is they don't work very well in the early beginning, and you just throw away money. Offline is the easiest way for you to convince customers. And so these companies did a lot of their customer acquisition offline. And as they grow, then they started moving online. But offline is the way to go. And so doing things that don't scale is actually much more important, because you learn about the behaviors of customers and you adapt your value proposition and you convince them much more cost effectively. And Airbnb did the experiments. Facebook versus all these offline tactics in the beginning. Facebook ads were not as cost effective as offline. And then lastly, if you have a supply side, which Airbnb, Uber, and Etsy all did, you focus first on getting suppliers to your business, then on customers. Right? That's most important. You need the suppliers on board first before you start acquiring consumers.
So talk about how digital disruption played out in the luxury handbag business, and what can other organizations learn from this?
So the luxury handbag business is quite interesting, because research has shown that the average woman has around 7 to 12 handbags in their closets that are virtually new and are not being used.
Guilty.
The value of these handbags collectively is on the order of thousands and thousands of dollars for many women, but it's being untapped. So a few years ago, a student of mine realized this, and his name is Charles Albert Gora, and he came up with a startup called Rebag in New York City. And Rebag was first trying to convince people to sell their handbags, their used luxury handbags, to them. So basically you go online and you take a picture and you describe the state of your handbag, and they'll automatically say, we'll buy it for this price. It's not a consignment service. It's not, give it to us, we'll try to sell it. If we do, we'll give you the money. On the spot, it had an algorithm to say, we'll give you $400 for this handbag. And then you just pack it up, send it off, they send you a check in 2 days, you get your money. And then it resells the handbag in the secondary market. But the big insight that Charles got from Rebag was that women had a huge pool of value in their closets. 2, under the right conditions, if it was quick, remember those costs, low effort, and low time, and low monetary cost, they will sell many of these handbags to get money to buy new handbags. And 3, the value that these handbags have, it virtually stays the same over time. It reduces slightly, but it preserves value. That means that you can sell it well, and people who buy it will buy it at a good discount to the new prices. And the business just took off. Rebag is doing very well. It opened many stores in New York City. It's branched out. It got, tens of millions of dollars of VC funding, and it's growing like crazy.
And this was one of your students?
This is one of my students. That's right. And this is one case in many other industries in which the market for expensive assets, let's call it, is big and sustained to the point that There's just too many of these assets in the market today. According to Charles, there's too many luxury handbags in the market today. The market doesn't need more new handbags. It doesn't need Gucci, Louis Vuitton, or Hermès to keep producing the hundreds of thousands of handbags and putting it in the market such that women buy it, use it a few times, and put it in their closet. What the market needs today is a reshuffling of these handbags, reallocating. Right? So Charles is kind of in the business, in the logistics business of figuring out, oh, you're not using that $1,000 bag? Let me give it to somebody else. Oh, that one, back to you and this and that. So he thinks it, and when I realized it, it's very clever. There's a concept called asset utilization, which is the percentage of time that an expensive asset is actually being productively used. So cars are expensive assets. In the US, the average time that a car is actually being used to transport people is about 4% of the total time that it's available to be used. The other 96% is the car is in a garage, in a parking lot, or stuck in traffic, not being used. Right? So only 4%. And if you look at many other assets, like vacation homes are, the asset utilization was pretty low until Airbnb came about. Right? Luxury watches, jewelry, anything expensive, it's not being productively used as a percentage of the time that it could be used. So Charles is like, well, handbags are seldomly used. I'm create a business that reshuffles around. And obviously, as you can imagine, that is highly disruptive to the luxury handbag industry that is in the business of bringing more handbags to the market. The market doesn't need more luxury handbags. Not as many as today. And probably we could say the same thing about cars. The market doesn't need GM to make 1 million cars per year around the world. We have too many cars. We have too many handbags. We have too many camper vans. We have too many, lots of things that companies now, startups are now saying, we are going to improve the asset utilization by creating these secondary markets that reshuffle it around. And the disruption has been dramatic.
Who's coming after Charles's company to buy him up?
The established companies are very worried about it, and it'll take time for them to realize that they need to evolve their business model. That we can't be in the business of fabrication and then pushing out to consumers. That's what 30 years of luxury goods is. Fabricate and create the need. I gotta have this, I gotta have this, I gotta have this. People are moving away from I gotta have this to I wanna use it for some time.
I wanna borrow it, use it, rent it.
Rent the runway is a great example, right? I don't need the $1,000 wedding gown. I just need it for a few days. And so they're also in the business of increasing asset utilization. So if you're a startup, just look at where are assets. Just start walking around the streets and going to your friend's house and see what is not being used that is highly valuable, that you can make a business out of it. That probably would be a good strategy.
Right. So what can organizations learn from a company like Alibaba and their unprecedented growth? I mean, that was quite a story.
Well, Alibaba, when I look at the numbers, from founding in 1997 up until today, it is a gigantic company today, and it grows at startup pace.
Have other companies copied that business model since its inception?
Most definitely. All around the world now, companies that started with e-commerce, like Amazon, like Alibaba, are looking at it and saying, instead of we just grow our business and penetrate and compete more, or grow into very disparate businesses, what they're looking at it is saying, what is the customer value chain? What portion do I actually deliver of this customer value chain, and what don't I deliver for the customer and that I could deliver? So Alibaba started saying, well, we sell products from business to business, and then it went from business to consumer, and then consumer to consumer. And then it said, well, the people that are buying these products, they need to communicate with the supplier. Let's create a chat app for that purpose. And then they built this chat app. Saying, well, they need to pay for it, and the current methods of payment aren't working so well, so they created a product called Alipay that became Ant Financial, multi-billion-dollar business in the payments business. Say, well, the people need to get the products, and well, let's make a better shipping and logistics services. And then they create a business there. And then they create a business in software, in search engines, and then they bought a company in that does hardware, phone hardware. and operating system, and they started branching out in all of the activities of the customer value chain in the process of buying goods online. Today they cover virtually all of them, and this growth is what I've termed coupling, because you couple activities together, and in the process the beauty of it is that you need to sell new services but to your current customers and the ones that actually like you and love you. And so it becomes much easier to convince your current customer to adopt a solution versus creating a new product and trying to go after a new customer. And this growth by coupling is one of the causes of Alibaba's dramatic success and growth.
Okay, what is growth stall, and what are the top 3 reasons for growth stall at companies, which Alibaba didn't go through?
So growth stall is this idea that companies that are getting bigger, they grow very fast because they become better and better at their markets that they chose to enter, but at some point in time their growth plateaus or slightly decreases. So increase very fast, followed by either a plateau in sales or market share or slightly decrease. So McDonald's went through it in the early 2000s. Microsoft went through it in 2008. IBM has been going through it, quite a few big companies. The causes are many, but there's a few ones that are repeated in many, many industries and companies that I've looked at. The first one is basically as you grow, you kind of dominate a market, and then you have this question, okay, we start not growing as fast naturally and we want to go into new markets, and they try to go to new markets and it just doesn't work because they can't be as competitive in a new market as they were in the traditional one. So just trying to find the actual market, new market to go into and have another hockey stick growth is very challenging. So that's one cause of growth stall. The second cause is the companies, as they grow, they amass these resources that they just try to leverage, right? If it's a retailer, they get more and more stores. Why? Because their growth equation is, we put new stores bring new customers, that brings new money. So let's get new stores. But then they start populating with so many stores, and suddenly there's stores too close to each other. Bank branches is we create new branches and we stuff them with new products, and that's the way we grow. Telecom operators, how do we make more money? We plug in more households to our network, and that will give us. So they start plugging in, and after a while, you can't do that anymore, and they try to leverage those resources. And it's all about the resource, all about the resource, all about the store, all about the cables, and they lose the focus on customers' evolving needs. So the other aspect is the growth stall is they're so focused on that, and customers move into other needs that are not being fully addressed. Then they leave for startups that are more niche. And that's the tension. As you grow, you become the mass provider of things. And all the companies that steal some of your activities, they're these specialized niche players that eat around the borders. So each one comes and eats around the border by being a little bit more premium, a little bit more cheaper, a little bit more convenient, a little bit more trendy, a little bit more this, a little bit more that. And they start kind of slowly eroding the pie of the mass. But the mass is like too big. What can they do with all of these players, right? So that's kind of how big companies stall their growth. And by what I've observed is the companies that don't react very strongly and fastly, it's like heart attacks, right? You have a few, like 10, 15, 20 minutes or a stroke that in a patient that you need to address very, very strongly, importantly, or else these companies afterwards, they stay on years and years of limbo.
So your book states that companies are basically not customer-centric. Explain what you mean by this, and how can organizations get away from this mindset of not being customer-centric?
So large companies are generally not customer-centric because of the organizational structure that they have and the needs to address investors and the market as a whole, right? They have so many other needs. The customer is just one aspect of what they care about fundamentally. And what I've observed is that as you grow, you have so many of these other competing needs and priorities, then they take precedence. Your major decisions are, what is it better for my company in terms of the P&L? What is it better for my company or in terms of my salary and my increase inside the business? And companies start making these decisions. Individuals, employees make these decisions of what is better for them or certain aspects. And slowly but surely you start to seeing that customers become secondary, tertiary, or even lower. A startup has no other obligation than to its customer. If it doesn't satisfy its customer needs, it's dead tomorrow, right? So a startup has no alternative to being customer-centric. They kind of are by definition, or they're dead. Big companies, other priorities take importance. And the way to address is fundamentally kind of shifting to customer centricity. And the first step in doing that is mapping out the customer value chain, making it very clear inside their organization. What are these activities that customers do, some of which we do on their behalf? Where are we creating value? Where are we capturing value? Where are we eroding value that we could eliminate? And say the priority needs to be these three avenues: create more value for customers, reduce value charging activities, eliminating value eroding activities that they don't require to doing. If you don't do that, the startups will do it, and that's the way kind of you start going downhill.
So how has your employer, Harvard University, adapted to this disruptive landscape over the years?
Well, education is being disrupted as we speak, right? It's a big shift. There's a lot of ingrained views on higher education. First, go to college, go to university. You need to spend 4 years there. The process of training professionals is kind of decoupled in a sense that first you spend 4 years training, then you apply. Well, we all know that after 4 years, so much has changed, and we learn the skills that we don't need, and we learn that we need something else. So there's a lot of people out there in the job market that are like, I don't have the skills for what I want to do, or I spent 4 years doing things that are not now relevant. And I think we need to bring this back together in figuring out a way in which you can educate and apply constantly throughout life. When people say education is a lifelong journey, well, just make it that way. Why do you need to separate it into learning and then doing? Ideally, people should go into college and spend a year and then maybe work and then spend a year and work, or so on and so forth, but then for a long period of their lives. We've seen the rise in subscription in many markets. There's still, only I've seen one in the University of Michigan, such a thing as a lifetime subscription to courses at the university. I think that should be everywhere. Where did you go to school?
Alfred.
Alfred, okay, so you should have access to lifelong education there. Whenever you feel like it.
Go online and do your...
Either go online or go physically there. I would love in my class, I teach e-commerce now, I would love in my class that somebody, that graduated 10, 15 years ago just drops by and is like, I need to learn about e-commerce, because I'm sure lots of them would want
So
that.
do you think most of these universities will start doing this? The
think
new business model?
I think the new and innovative ones will. There's a host of reasons why you shouldn't do that. That's incompatible with the current structure. But that's the downfall of established companies. That's why they get disrupted. There's a variety of reasons not to. There's so much ingrained political and structural and resource constraints regarding that. But if you really want to be customer-centric, you understand the current needs of the customers, and as a professional who wants to be educated, separating too much time without application from the application, then realizing that you need to retool yourself is not a good way. So, Harvard is doing lots of things. Online education, it went, and it's trying to figure that out. It's a challenge. We're doing, Harvard Business School has HBX actually, that does these online case discussions, which is a huge challenge in some aspects, but we're making great progress. So there's a lot of experiments along the way. My view is the big experiment that needs to be made is this idea of how do you create a system that allows people to enter and exit the university as they please, as they feel they need to, as opposed to separate it in, you're going to get a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, or an executive course, and you need to apply every time. No, once you applied, we know you're good for undergrad, we know you're good, you should have access, you should have a perpetual license to learn.
Now, did you have any specific goals in writing your book, and do you think you actually achieved them?
So I felt that I was kind of compelled. I would give my presentations of what I learned, and many people said, I want to learn more, you need to write a book. After hearing this again and again, I felt kind of, okay, so why not? And after that, things quickly evolved. I got a good agent, and then his name is Lauren Rees, and he kind of went out and sold the book, and there were many publishers wanting to buy Crown Currency, Penguin at Random House, bought it, and the idea was just to kind of like, chapter one is like, how did I discover this pattern? Because I felt that it was there. It wasn't like something that I'm seeing.
Like, how did I notice it and no one else did?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So just like how, just explain the process by which I notice it, and just explaining that, and then the rest of the book is saying, well, what are the things out there? But have I achieved the purpose? No, we're only in the beginning. I don't know. I hope some people will read it and find it valuable and find it interesting.
I'm sure lots of people will read it.
Hopefully so. Fingers crossed.
So where do you think the next wave of disruption will come from, and what should companies be doing to prepare for it?
The most annoying question as an academic, but we keep this private, I'll just fill you in, is when you did a lot of research that says, I understand this, and at the end of the presentations, people are like, what's next? I said, I did so much work to tell you what's this.
Pay attention to this.
Exactly. So we would love to say, forget about what's next, focus on understanding this, but everybody asked me, what's next, what's next? And so I did not want to do it, but I was forced to do it. A last chapter in my book addressing what's next. But the challenge of what's next is, either you say what's next and it's completely wrong, and then somebody's going to come back and saying, you got that completely wrong, or saying what's next by answering what is now. Basically something that everybody already noticed, and you just say it, and then you're not going to be wrong, but you're not going to provide any insight. So you're in between this thing of, I'm going to likely get it wrong, or I'm just saying something that everybody knows. So I think, how do I solve that dilemma? It's like fundamental dilemma. What am I going to do to say what's next? Well, basically I thought about it, and I went back to chapter one and said, how did I learn about decoupling? And then I pulled out the elements that helped me identify decoupling, and then I said, you know what, this is how I learned about decoupling, and there's some principles about learning about what's next. I'll show you the principles, and hopefully you can identify what's next. So what are some of these principles? So first is, don't focus in one industry. Look across industries. If you focus on one industry, you're just narrowing, seeing just a trend only in that industry, or by the time you see what's happening, it has gone through so many other industries that you're basically saying what everybody knows. So broaden your horizon. Second point, consumers, going back to what we talked earlier, consumers, they don't compartmentalize into industries. You're buying, you know, at home you're buying books, and you're buying food, and you're reserving travel, and you're helping your daughter get into college. You're making consumption decisions all across the board, right? And so understanding your behavior in these different industries will help, even if a manager is in another industry, because you're going to use the same logic. And so the problem is there's hundreds and hundreds of industries, right? How can I tell readers, look at these 100 industries and what's going on and try to find a pattern? That's impractical. So what I did is I reduced the workload for them. And basically what I identified is that there's 7 categories of consumer purchases that U.S. households spend about 94% of their income on. And these categories are how we educate ourselves, how we heal ourselves, healthcare, how we transport ourselves, how we feed ourselves, food, how do we live, you know, home, you know, things inside the home, and how do we, what do we wear, right? So these 7 categories across the United States correspond to 94% of our household income. And the decisions that we make there, because they are so important and pervasive, they affect our behavior in any of the other industries in which we buy products. And so you should focus on these 7 industries. And in the book, I show where are the costs to consumers rising fastest in these industries, because those are the ones ripe for disruption. And I'm not going to give away everything, but
Got to get the book.
Got to get a book, but I'll give you 2, which is unsurprisingly education and healthcare. The cost has been rising dramatically high in the past 20 years, and there's a huge opportunity for disruption there, right?
Thales, thanks for sharing your fascinating book with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that's it for this edition of Sarder TV. We hope you enjoyed and learned something new today. Until next time, I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick. Thanks for watching.